So welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here for this excellent roundtable. We have an amazing panel for you today. The name of this panel, as I would say in college, in case you are in the wrong room, this is the BIPOC BIPOC Roundtable. So we have a panel of Black, Indigenous, people of color who are going to talk about the ways they've used their work to shed light on social injustices and the need for systemic change, focusing definitely on the work that folks have created, but also the ways in which we manifest that through our activism potentially. So, all right, thank you all for coming. And I am going to call on each person to introduce themselves, and then I will introduce myself. What we're going to do is about half an hour to 35 minutes of discussion, and then we will take questions from the Discord chat. So if you need to get into the Discord, we are in Olentangy room, the even room. So you can head over there and questions will be transferred over here to us. We will answer them again at the end. And then if anyone feels like meeting us in that chat room afterwards for more discussion or meeting each other there, you may feel free to do so. So let us start with Andrea, if you would not mind introducing yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Andrea Hairston. I'm going to mute my video for a minute because that's the cover of my book, which is coming out on September 8th, Master of Poisons. I am also a playwright and a professor of theater and Africana studies at Smith College. And I've written several other novels, We'll Do Magic for Small Change, Redwood and Wildfire, Mindscape, and essays and all those sorts of things. And I love science fiction and fantasy, and it has changed my life. So I'm psyched to be here.
Yes.
And I bike.
And you bike. Well, now in this, the time of La Rona, of course, we must all engage in whatever outdoor activities we can. Thank you so much. Now we'll turn to Chris, if you would not mind introducing yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Silver Spook Miller. I'm a Native Hawaiian activist, former social worker and STEM teacher. And I am currently also a game developer and science fiction writer, but predominantly I write the stories for games like NASFiC, which is already up there. Yeah, I've been making games for 20 years, like since high school, and writing science fiction. My probably biggest claim to fame is interviewing William Gibson, most recently, like a couple years ago. And I basically make a lot of cyberpunk adventure games about being a Black Indigenous, being a person of color in Hawaii in a ghettoized part of what mostly looks like, beautiful Disney-ified Pacific, but sometimes it's not as nice as that. So that's what the game's about. That's what I'm about. And I rant into the internet sometimes.
Awesome. Yeah, someone from Miami. I feel that those dastardly tropics. Thank you so much, Chris. We will now turn to C, if you would not mind introducing yourself, please.
Hi, I'm CL Polk. I am a novelist. Probably know my work from the Kingston Cycle. 2 books out of 3 have been published. I have a book in a totally different world coming up in October. On October the 13th, The Midnight Bargain will be released onto an undeserving public. And let's see, I ride a bicycle, I knit, and I like tea.
Yes. And you've also written a lot of excellent short fiction.
Well, I wouldn't say a lot. I've written a couple short stories.
Yes. Thank you very much, C. Thank you for being here. Vida, if you would not mind now, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Vida Cruz. I'm from the Philippines, where it's 8 a.m. Let's see. I released a chapbook last year called Beyond the Line of Trees, and I will put that link here in the chat because you can buy it on Gumroad. I write about colonialism, feminism, disability, and that is what I got a Tiptree Fellowship for in 2018, because that's what it was called in 2018. My work deals with, as I said, those 3 axes of marginalization. And I love fantasy. I have 10 dogs. I don't bike, but I love tea.
They are such good dogs. Thank you so much for being here with us. And now we turn to Vikram, if you would not mind introducing yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vikram Paralkar. I'm a doctor and a scientist at the University of Pennsylvania. So I treat patients with leukemia and I do research into the genetics of leukemia. That's my day job. I'm also an author. I've written 2 works of fiction. The first one is titled The Afflictions, which is, and both of my books have medical themes. The first one, The Afflictions, is a collection of imaginary diseases from a medieval medical encyclopedia. The second one, which came out this year, which is Night Theater, is set in a clinic in rural India where a surgeon is visited by the dead who ask him to return them to life. And I have always been interested in science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, all the way down to magic realism. And I actually see these as sort of seamless transitions from one genre to the other.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you so much. And so cool to have a doctor on the panel right now, but we will not get too serious about things. It's going to get serious. All right. I am Valerie Valdez. I am your moderator for this evening. I'm the author of Chilling Effect, a space opera found family story. The sequel Prime Deceptions comes out next month. I am also a short fiction writer, horror primarily, but also science fiction and fantasy. And I also write speculative poetry. My latest poem will be coming out in Uncanny Magazine next year. Yay, we have funded. So submit your work. I think they're still open right now. All right, let us get started. We shall turn now to the questions, the roundtable discussion that we have here. So a question that some folks have been asking online recently is, what radicalized you? So can you point to any specific situation or event that started you on the path towards seeking greater social justice in your work or in real life? Or was there more of an accumulation of smaller microaggressions or experiences or observations that led you to where you are today? And if you do not mind, we will start again in alphabetical order and then we'll start mixing things up. So Andrea, would you be able to field that question for us first?
Okay, well, I've been thinking about this since that question got posed. And I said in our email conversation that I grew up in the 50s and 60s. So I would have to say, you know, it wasn't micro, it was like macro aggressions. So it wasn't small, it was big. And I lived in a Black community in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my grandfather was a Baptist minister, and he was a liberation theologist. So, you know, he was fighting for civil rights. And at 11, I went to the March on Washington with my mother in 1963. And horrible things happened to us and great things happened to us on that journey. And I was there to protect my mother, who I called Little Mommy, because I was this, you know, I think I was 5'6" at the time, or 7, and she was 5 feet tall. So I was the big bruiser who was going to help her out. And all these strange things happened. You know, my father didn't want us to go. You know, people were very afraid of what might happen. And there were people who, you know, desired, you know, violence. So I clearly remember that experience, but I don't remember the speeches, right? So I heard the speech, but truly I don't remember it. I remember listening to it later and going, oh, I heard that. But my whole life I've been in that community and working on those questions and issues, and they just accumulated, as you said. But they weren't micro. They were definitely like, you couldn't sit in places. We traveled in the South. You couldn't do things. You couldn't, you know, drink at the water fountain. You know, and I lived in Pittsburgh, where you supposedly didn't have segregation, but you know, things were segregated, so it was de facto. And I integrated places. I was the first math textbook editor at Houghton Mifflin in 1975. And again, it wasn't micro at all. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, here I am. And they were asking me, can you lose a razor blade in your afro? You know, so really amazing things happened and really troubling things happened. But all through that, I felt like I had the power of my community, which believed in me. So it was a working class Black community, and they said, you're going to college, you believe in yourself, and we believe in you. So I had all of that power behind me, the Baptist Minister Church, everybody behind me. So I had dreams that I thought, okay, I can do these, and these will happen. So it was a science fictional fantasy community projecting itself into the future. They were all Afrofuturists, and they said, you will do what we didn't do, and take all of our wisdom and do it. So I feel like, oh my God, I better. So I have all of that like all of their desire, hopes, wishes, dreams, histories in me, and it's my charge to pass it on. And so I think that's what I've been doing since I was like 10 or 11.
Yeah, radicalization by community. That is beautiful, for real, because yeah, having the support and having that feeling that you are carrying that forward. Yeah. So from that awesome stuff, we'll turn now to Chris. So Chris, what radicalized you? Where did you come from, and how did you get here?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep this short, but I am I'm known for my 6-hour or 36-hour rants. But anyway, I'm from Hawaii. Yes, I know this is a hard one. How do I bring up like $7 trillion worth of marketing over the course of a century? That's all about from Blue Hawaii to 51st dates. I'm here to like destroy. Well, you can't come to Hawaii because 99% drop in tourism. Thank goodness, because of COVID-19. But let me tell you, it is not all fun and sun for the people who actually work in the tropical, culturally prostituted Disneyland. That is what I live in. And I am from the poorest parts of Hawaii. If you've ever been here, if you know where Kalihi Valley is, if you know where Waianae is, if you ever know where Palolo is, you're not going to find that in your itinerary when you go to Hanama Bay, Waikiki. And you can stay in the Ritz-Carlton if you want to give Trump some money. You can stay in, you want to give Goldman Sachs some money, stay at the Turtle Bay Resort or any of the other massive conglomerates that control all of my homeland, which we are, I won't go too far from that. But a lot of the rage is basically being Hawaiian in a place where I grew up. My friends lived 20 to a house. We ate Spam and ramen for dinner. We played Dodge the Rock in the ghetto because that's all we could afford. We went to a place called Tin Roof, and we throw rocks at each other. And whoever was least bloody when you came back home, that's who won. And then I got in a car with my father in a Toyota Corolla, 30 years old, like with the bumper falling off. And we drive into a private school right down the street from President Obama's alma mater. That costs $20,000 a year now. I make less money than it costs to send one of my children to the school. But my dad taught there, so we went there for free. And there, I was the only brown, bigger kid than everyone else. And I was basically an N-word of the Pacific to them. And I was the poorest kid, and I had holes in my shoes. And I got made fun of for my entire career. They were showing up in Audis and Lexuses and Porsches. And it was like, if you ever read a Gibson book, it's like going to school in the Villa Straylight and coming back to the sprawl every day of your life. That radicalized me a lot. And then I graduated and I became a STEM science. I got a computer science degree, became a STEM and science STEM teacher for the underserved youth of Honolulu, where you're 6 times more likely to be killed if you're a Pacific Islander by police, rather than compared to per capita than white people. And also you're living at $6,000 per capita income if you are Marshallese, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. You're at much higher rates of homelessness. My job was to help house and take care of kids in these ghettos, to stop them from joining the Bloods and the Crips, stop them from killing each other, being killed by police, being locked up forever in prison. And I was being paid enough to live in a Mazda Tribute, eating spoonfuls of peanut butter for dinner, giving my wife and children ramen and with some frozen peas and carrots, so they're not just eating MSG. So I was a homeless social worker and STEM teacher working full time. That's reality, and that's what the near future is about. It's about living next to the highest concentration of billionaires on the planet, right down the street from the CEO of eBay on a mountain. And I'm living in a gutter watching a Potemkin capitalist tour buses drive by my ghettos, and everybody talking about, oh, you're so lucky you live in Hawaii. Such a great place. No, Hawaii is ultra America. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so on the big island of Mauna Kea, what further radicalized me is protesting against the desecration of our sacred mountain here in Mauna Kea, and having the militarized police, the United States military and a B-52A Stratofortress drop bombs on our sacred mountain. That also, and watching Black Hawk copters fly over the tents of the kupuna and the elders here. And I could go on for a long time, so I'll stop there.
I was going to say any one of those things, any of them, but to have so many of them is just, it's a profound amount that you have to bear and have to shoulder, and of course you're working against it. So and I actually love the term cultural prostitution that you brought up earlier. I wrote that one down. That was great.
That's not my term. That's Haunani K. Trask's term, by the way.
It is a great term. Thank you. So thank you, Chris, and we will now move to C. What radicalized you?
Well, let's see. I didn't actually radicalize until much later. I lived in the middle of a great big lie. I am Canadian. I was born in New Westminster, British Columbia. I went to school. I went to school in New Westminster and Surrey, and then moved to Edmonton for the big oil boom because my parents, an interracial marriage, split up, and my father married another woman who was also white. And a lot of my experience, I compare notes with other biracial kids, and my experience kind of has some things that go on. And one of the biggest things is that you live inside an enormous lie because you don't want to upset the white people in your family. And I was raised to believe all of these things were true. Racism is over. Canada wasn't really all that racist anyway. You can do anything you want. You are made fun of because you don't act right. You are made fun of because you show off your intelligence. You are made fun of because you don't dress right. Nobody ever said, it's because you're Black. Nobody ever told me that when I was a little kid. It was unspoken. And I pretty much grew up in a sunken place. I didn't get out until, quite frankly, a few years ago. I decided that I was going to find out some things that I'd been overhearing on Twitter from Black Twitter that I didn't really understand. And I started looking into it and sort of gave myself a partial education on Black history that I didn't know because nobody told me. And so I basically have come to my life realizing that no, racism is real, and I absolutely suffered from it. And basically, everybody lied to me when I was little. And so the realization can kind of get me a little bit angry. I didn't grow up really poor. There was always something to eat. There was always clothes to wear. And so I didn't have a lot of hardship. But what I had was this weird world in which I was treated differently from everybody else while they told me I wasn't being treated differently from everybody else. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when I unlocked that mystery, it radicalized me. And then when I started to see it in my everyday life, and I started to see it all over the place, everywhere I went, everything I did, the things my friends said to me that I didn't know that I should stop them from saying if they were to continue to be my friends. All of these tiny little things kind of added up into a big mountain where I finally said, okay, that's it. That's enough. I've had it. Mm-hmm. I'm tired of denying who I am, and I'm tired of denying what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely more of the microaggressions route, and a lot of that resonates for me as well. So yeah, thank you. So Vida, if you want to take the question as well now, what radicalized you?
Okay, well, I grew up in an all-girls Catholic school, and my mother sent me to a Jesuit university for college, hoping that I would not become a radicalized activist if I went to the other premier university in
Pardon
the
me
Philippines.
For chuckling.
I know, but sorry, Mom, that's not what happened, because everyone is required to take up Theology 141, which is liberation theology. And then right after that, my first job was as a journalist, which, as you know, is a job that makes you grow up really fast. And so I spoke about being disabled and a woman and wanting to decolonize, and that's when all those things came together for me, because around that time I went to Clarion in the US, and while my class was super international, there were only 4 BIPOC there. And while nobody was outright racist to me, as far as I can recall, it was super obvious to me that I was not American when I was in America. And so I wanted to write a short story that would speak to my place of origin. And that started me on a deep dive into Philippine pre-colonial history. And until now, I'm still doing that deep dive, actually. Mm-hmm. And then after I got back from Clarion, a horrible harassment incident happened to me at work. I complained, and basically all the things that sexual assault victims talk about, uh, experiencing the gaslighting, the it's your fault, blah, blah, blah. I went through all that. So every time I see somebody going through the same thing, I'm like, ooh, if I could just do something for you, I would. And then after that incident, well, just for the record, the guy got off with like a 15-day suspension, and I got off with a ruined reputation and mental health problems. So I got diagnosed with major depressive disorder, something I'm still struggling with to this day. And disability was the last thing of my identity that I came to terms with. I'm probably still coming to terms with it. Like here in the Philippines, you can apply for PWD card, which you can use for discounts and things like that. But it was hard for me to even accept that I was disabled, and perhaps the idea of, oh, my medicine will be cheaper if I get this card was the last straw. And as you know, we are under the Duterte regime, and I would call what's happening here a genocide of the poor. And while I did not grow up poor per se, my family has struggled for the last decade because of my dad is a transplant patient, and that took up a lot of our money. So I know what it's like to struggle to some extent. My work, my recent work, as I do a series of short stories that are in news article format. They posit if Philippine mythological creatures lived among Filipinos in the modern day. And lately, the topics of my stories have been like, uh, yes, again, drug war, genocide of the poor. But how would this change if mythological creatures were there to added to the equation? So there we go.
Cool, cool. Yeah, I mean, again, so much to unpack there, and so many different things that can add up to a very big picture here. And speaking of medical items, of course, now we move to Vikram, who is our resident physician here. And so, Vikram, what radicalized you? I know, again, you said your work deals with medical issues sometimes.
Yeah, I grew up in India so while I was growing up as a teenager, I would often look at many of the messed up aspects of the society around me, sort of the poverty, the broken political system, the fact that it was very much geared towards fostering corruption and rewarding the rich. And then I would look at the United States and UK and think, now these are mature countries. These are countries that have figured out their problems, and now finally these are real countries that are ready to go into the 21st century. And now here I am, and
Yikes.
But it's actually so I guess there are two things that have sort of, as Vida mentioned, sort of the colonial mindset. It actually reminded me of the fact that in India, there is this, there's still, even though everyone in India is brown skinned, there are differences between fairer brown skinned people and darker brown skinned people. And though those who are fairer tend to get better opportunities, get put up on billboards for various ads. There's actually a skin cream called Fair and Lovely that is sold in India that is supposed to lighten your complexion. And although, Indians are happy that the British no longer rule India, very often you'll hear people say like, well, if the British were ruling, maybe things would be better. And so I think there's sort of this chronic cultural inferiority that sometimes gets embedded. But then coming to the United States, I was really, and especially as a doctor, I was struck by, as Chris mentioned, just the empowerment of the rich at the prospect at the expense of such an immense part of the population. And it doesn't have to be that way in America. America is an immensely rich country that can afford to give healthcare to everyone, that can afford to give dignity to everyone. And we don't have to have billionaires being able to keep every last cent of the income that they make, and in essence suck the population dry. And so I think I don't know if I've necessarily been radicalized, but what I would say is that just my experiences with medical disparities, with looking at how, Black, Latino, people of color, because of chronic absence of access to healthcare, develop chronic diseases that should have been detected and fixed early, and as a result, they end up caught with a medical system that they could have avoided in the first place. And once they're caught up with it, they're unable to get the long-term care that they need to recover and return to life, normal life. And so, increase taxes and provide social services.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, and bringing up that chronic cultural inferiority, I think that ties into, as well as Vita had already mentioned, decolonizing our own minds, which we had a brief panel discussion about different aspects of that. But anyway, so that leads into our next question, which is how it's said that one of the first things that we need to do in our quest for justice is to decolonize our own minds. So were there any received or externally reinforced biases or prejudices or self-esteem issues that you had to acknowledge and overcome in yourself before you could start to work to help others? And does any of that still show up as like scars or splinters or things that you process through your art? And for that one, I'm going to start with Chris, if that's okay. And so I'm going to do kind of like a concentric wheel thing. So Andrea will go last, and we're going to go in the same order and keep doing it that way, if that makes sense to everyone. Chris.
Okay. Decolonizing the mind. I talk about that often. As I've said, all the experiences that I've had, that I've just elaborated, hopefully within a reasonable amount of time, but that's like Neofood is, I've worked for AAA game companies, the biggest, like EA, these massive game companies that make more money than film companies and TV combined. And that was a terrible experience. I've worked in which my biggest creative decision was like, should the suicide jack on the Windows accessories version of Texas Hold'em go on the right or the left side of his head? I mean, right? I want to talk about what it's like in a racist, international, imperial capitalist society. No, absolutely not. Let's talk about how we can make this card game better. So Neofood was like, I'm going to make my own company. It's going to be like, it's basically just me. My pro tip is, make sure you marry. I used to say Canadian, but make sure that if you're going to get married, make sure you're somebody who is okay with you, risking your entire net worth, which is not much, on a video game. And so I was working still full time, but while working, but it was a time investment to take this risk. Of me trying to make a game, but it was all literally what I was experiencing during the day. The game itself has like images of homeless tent cities, things that you never see in a lot of what calls itself cyberpunk. But it pulls too many punches. And that's what I did. I got rejected by multiple publishers. It's like, we actually can't publish this game because you're talking about the wrong people, power structures, capital, corporate, political. We can't publish it. So you know what? I'm gonna make this game, and 2 people might play it, 5 million, 2,000. I don't know, and I don't care. I'm going to make this game because I'm not going to be a 50-year-old Goldman Sachs high-frequency trading programmer going, I wonder what it would have been like to not sell out to the empire and make billions of dollars like Jeff Bezos. Because I had an option, actually. I was studying to become, I'm not going to live in this ghetto anymore. I'm going to go to New York City and be a devil's advocate with code, And then I was like, I'm just going to do this. And then that's what the game. So it is completely a process of putting into words and fiction. I programmed, I did the art and the music. I've been working in games for 20 years, so I've acquired a variety of skills to do that, and I had the capacity to do it. We're not making tons of money. We sell like $30,000 worth of copies of it, and every sale really counts. We're not using it, but whatever I can do to both deal with that and in my own head, and also let people understand the story. When I talk and when I make these games, I'm not speaking for myself. I think Andrea and Vikram, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, both kind of elucidated, or several people have elucidated that I'm speaking for the hundreds of kids who have been killed by each other under the violence of poverty that they have enacted on each other with weapons, the violence of the police, and the violence of making Amazon Whole Foods vegan and non-vegan goat cheese, or putting out California's wildfires right now because they're in prison for the rest of their life. There are hundreds and hundreds of kids, and I speak for them. And it's not about me, So anyway.
But it's still, again, there's a lot of you that's going into this process, a lot of you that you're working through there. So
it's
and so C, can you take that same question as well? Are there aspects of your own experience that you're decolonizing your mind about, anything that shows up in your work as scars or splinters?
Absolutely. And it's going to continue to happen for as long as I'm writing, because I came into this game really late. I came to my realizations really late. And I had started writing before I started the process of decolonizing my own mind. And you can see it in my books as they are published right now. I started writing in 2014. And I'm still kind of processing it on paper. When I learn something, when I realize something, when I recognize that kind of that subtle inferiority that you get taught when you're not white. Well, first I get really angry. And then I diarize about it, and then I try to introduce it into a story. But what I find most often is that I'm still at the stage where I'm still trying to tell people, you know what, please don't do this. It's not nice. And I think I'm going to progress beyond that at some point in my writing, but I'm just basically using it to reflect what I'm thinking now. And I'm going to continue to do that for years.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. And so now we will ask again the same question of Vida, if you don't mind.
Okay, so a little history lesson for everyone who's not familiar with the Philippines. We've been colonized 3 times. Oh, and the longest one was the Spanish for over 300 years. And then we have our American period for like 50 years. And then there was a little blip in World War II when Japan did their whole greater East Asian prosperity sphere. And there was this little period where the Spanish were fighting with the Dutch, and then a little period where they were fighting with the British just to take over. Anyway, I mentioned all that because naturally, in a period where you've been colonized so many times, you have a lot of heroes. But what I've come to learn about heroics is that no one person, no small group of people can save the world, much less save your society. We need to work together as a community in order to be able to lift ourselves up from this, as Vikram says, inferior colonial mindset. And the thing is, my culture is super, like, heroes are like saints at this point. And I feel, maybe this is controversial, but I feel like relying too much on heroes makes us lazy, too lazy to save ourselves. And what I would like us all to realize is that we need to get to the point where we don't need heroes, because we can work together to defeat whatever it is. And we are so far away from that, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, and the chronic cultural inferiority was what Vikram had brought up. Yeah, and that notion of, you know, if you have been colonized so many times, you're receiving all these different external sources. Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, continue. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. And so that's the thing. The work that my otherwise grant supported was the fictional news stories that I do. And the concept was trying to find the warrior, the writer, the witness, and the witch in Philippine culture and Philippine history. And that's what my stories are trying to do, which is empower people who once thought that they had no power themselves, and to try to do it together.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Vikram, if you would not mind picking up this topic now.
You know, I suppose in some ways I've really lived a very privileged life. Both of my parents are doctors. I grew up in a fairly affluent home in India. I came to the United States as a doctor, and I've lived in Philadelphia, which is a very liberal city. And so I can't claim to have experienced many of the micro or macro aggressions that a lot of people on this panel have experienced. I suppose the only slight microaggressions that sometimes I've experienced, which tend not to bother me, but typically they would be in the form of, "Oh, you're from India, your English is so good," and it's amazing how many people think that that's a compliment. But I certainly think that that is changing, and I just think there is a lot of awareness of how much thoughtless speech very often passes as being accepted. But I think even in, I mean, I think especially the murder of George Floyd has really provoked this sort of soul searching by a lot of groups. And even in our departments at work, there have been forums where students, graduate students, postdocs have been able to talk about their experiences and the experiences that they have had and aggressions that they have felt within even a very liberal university in a city like Philadelphia. So I'm optimistic, and I think, yeah, I'm glad we're having this panel.
Thank you. And so, Andrea, if you wouldn't mind then also taking this up, and we're also going to start talking about, well, you had talked about the notion of making invisible things visible.
That's where I was going to go.
Take it away.
Because one of the things that I think is really critical to everything that we've been talking about, I mean, like Vita was talking about, like, heroes. And the trouble is, Bertolt Brecht, who's an amazing 20th century German playwright, he said, "Woe to the country that needs heroes." Because if you need heroes to save you, you're already sunk. So I actually used that notion in my current novel, Master of Poisons. We're facing like crises that there is not one man who will come and save us. It is a collective action. And so our society is really bent on this sort of rugged individualist, manifest destiny, colonialist, white male powermonger who can, whatever you do, you get to do if you have the power to do it, as opposed to survival of the friendliest, right? Survival of the community, survival of the folks who work together. So to me, that's one of the deep things that I have to decolonize. And it's invisible. So I want to work on all the invisible things, because I feel like Vikram. I was in this very powerful community. So I felt really, we weren't rich, we weren't poor. I mean, we were almost poor. But I rode the crest of the wave of the 50s and 60s. So we were going to change the world for sure. But as in, there's a wonderful book called Whistling Vivaldi, which talks about the stereotype threat that you have internalized without knowing about it. So you walk around and you fear things that you aren't aware of. So I was a mathematician as an undergraduate, or even in high school, and I would often be the only Black woman in a group of mathematicians, and I left math. I just said, well, I'm going to do theater. Now, I wanted to do both of them equally. And I think I got crap for both, but there was an assumption that I could do the theater, right? I was theatrical, even though I was also mathematical, but I was theatrical. People were like kind of disappointed that I didn't go into math and physics, because we also don't believe in the arts. So, I had to work through all of that. Like, shouldn't I be a mathematician? I should do that for my race. And I should do that for my gender. I should, because it's better than the arts, and the arts get, crapped on. But in fact, one of the tasks of the artist is to speak truth to power, is to make the invisible, the ways in which we how power works in a society. We can reveal how normal works. And particularly in science fiction and fantasy, you can mess with normal, because normal runs in the background. They're like, it's back here. And then we can say, no, we're going to put what you think is normal right in front of your face. And suddenly you realize that, oh my God, things that you took for granted are not absolutes, are not like, oh my God, everyone in the world has to do this. In fact, they have different history in the Philippines than they have in China. Oh my God, and they don't really care about the Greeks, right? And they have done amazing things. The Japanese came up with calculus and didn't know anything about Newton, right? I mean, they're like, oh, whatever. They came up with, people were writing all over, they were watching the stars, but we don't know any of those stories. And that reinforces a whole power structure and a whole sense of who we are and what we can do. And there were indigenous people in South America who were maritime people, and they were on their boats and they were, going all over. And there were people from Hawaii going all around the world. And in fact, I saw one of those boats. I came to Hawaii and I was trying to see that boat that had gone all the way around the world using traditional, astronomy. So, that's one of the things that I have been really working in my whole life to like make sure that I don't devalue myself or the arts or mathematics or any of it and assume that whoever I'm looking at, I know, right? Because we think I know your story. Actually, I know stereotypes.
Mhm.
I don't know your story. So people say, oh, well, nobody would do that. I'm like, do you know everybody? But notice how many times people say, people don't do that. Like, which people? When? Where? In what world? Right? And once you start that process, you find yourself doing, well, she's too old. Oh, whoops. What am I doing? And it's because it is the way we are, it's our background knowledge. And that's what I want to do. That's what is my ongoing everyday practice. And that's what my book is about, Master of Poisons. Because we have climate catastrophe because of colonialist, capitalist stuff that Chris was talking about, right? And we have it. And we need to do something. We don't need heroes. We need all of us. And we are capable of it. So yeah, that's what I want us to believe in ourselves enough to make the changes that will save us.
True that, all of it. Thank you. I want to talk so much more. We have 9 minutes left. And so I know I had like 6 questions. We've gone through 2. So are there any questions from the audience? If so, get them in very rapidly. Otherwise, we're going to turn to one of the other questions that I have remaining. And so I will now stare at the chat briefly and see if anything materializes, because if not, then I'm going to go just leap into one of our questions so it doesn't take too much time away here. And I'm not seeing anything appear. So if anything, potentially we'll take the discussion again to the Discord afterwards. But let's go into one of my next questions. We already talked about some things in one of the other questions. So I'm going to skip over to in your work specifically. Let's focus on the stuff that you're writing, which not that you haven't been so far, but how do you think the existing systems, the sort of stuff that like Andrea was talking about just right now, sort of create and reinforce the kinds of issues that you tend to examine in your work? And do you prefer to replicate those systems fictionally as a means of critiquing them, exposing them, or do you prefer to speculate about better worlds, better systems, even if they're not perfect, ones that try to avoid those problems as a means of kind of, being aspirational? How do you tend to approach that? And we are going to start with C for this one.
Well, I think what I do the most often is I take a look at an existing system and I poke it with a stick so that you can see how awful it is. My first book, Witchmark, a lot of people, they came for the boys kissing, but I hope they stayed for the, this capitalism thing is literally a horror show. And here's why. And I'm hoping that even though like what I write is primarily like science fiction, fantasy, romance, that people will see the greater themes that I'm kind of exploring in my world building about the economy, very often about the economy, not so much about anything else as far as I can see. Like that's mostly what I'm talking about right now. But I think it's kind of weird how people are talking about how we can't rely on a hero to save us, that we have to like do that work collectively ourselves, because that's a tiny little thread that that has been kind of seeping into my work and is even stronger in the work that I'm currently working on that I'm not going to talk about. But yeah, mostly it's I examine, I question, I criticize, and not so much with the we could have a better world if we did this.
You poke with
I don't think I'm there yet.
Yeah. Thank you. Vida, same question. If I'm rushing now, it's because of the time. Sorry.
Okay, I've done both in my work. In the short stories I keep talking about, I am definitely poking at society with a stick. In fact, I'm also kind of hoping, what I do is I kind of scrub the stories of any mentions for, in case like the Duterte's followers want to search whom to tag and like get arrested by the police.
Mhm.
But in my other work, I have posited like worlds where what happens if these things don't exist or if the character is not like this. I realize it actually depends on the axis of marginalization for me. What's this? Usually when I'm talking about feminism, I try not to poke it with a stick because it brings up too many traumatic things for me. And with my novel in progress, I've made my entire cast full of learning disabilities or mental health issues. So I'm gonna see how that plays out.
Yeah, very different axes of marginalization for sure. Vikram.
Well, in my novel Night Theater, the protagonist is a surgeon in this tiny little village clinic who's visited by the dead who ask him to stitch up their wounds so they can return to life at dawn. And in addition to the somewhat speculative sci-fi aspect of this, one of the things I really wanted to construct into the book was that the clinic is in the middle of nowhere and the surgeon is alone and he cannot turn to the heavens for answers and he cannot turn to his colleagues for answers. In fact, there is no one who will help him. And so at the end of the day, all he has is his own conscience. And at the end of the day, that is when we deal with a society in which we may not be happy with its structure or its inequities. At the end of the day, all we have is ourselves and our individual souls. And so this collective action really at the end of the day has to come from each individual human being, realizing that we have the ability to effect change.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrea, what kind of systems are you building in here?
Wow. So I think I like to have everything, a line that I wrote in a play once, I'm everything I am all the time. So I start off usually with something horrible has happened, right? And in that horrible thing is all the mess of our society. And then my characters must solve it, right? And I don't even know how they're going to solve it. So I spend the book trying to solve it, and I'm like freaking out sometimes, like, oh my God, did I get one that, because I don't really like tragedy, So that's why I start with it. It's around, it exists, it does, amazing things. So I start with tragedies. So in Master of Poisons, there's a poison desert and it's blowing across the land and trees are dying and the fish are dying and the stuff is falling over and it's pretty bad. And no one will listen to the Master of Poisons who says, we should be doing something. And they all go, oh, well, tomorrow, or next week, or I don't have to do anything, I'm old, it'll be over with, whatever their reasons are, they're in deep denial. And then there's, and he has a plan.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're almost out of time.
Okay.
If you could please wrap up within the next minute or so. That would
Okay, so I'll be quick because we have one more person. So
Yes.
Awa is a griot and she's a storyteller and she's trying to conjure her way out of whatever the trouble is that Jola has found them in.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. All right, Chris. And then what we'll do is one really quick sweep to give everyone's social media. All right, Chris.
All right. Yeah. So I think definitely doing both, decolonizing and then building an actually livable future. I call it, the Neofeud. I'm working on Neofeud 2 currently. Neofeud 1 is on the Steam and itch.io. I'm a game maker, obviously, so I don't have any books. Well, I have a short story collection from Neofeud, but that game is definitely more about trying to give a full, no holds barred takedown of all of the, white supremacist, capitalist, international, imperial Death Star machine. And then if two eyes, I'm trying to build some potential solutions but it can't just be all about just everybody moving to a commune in the outskirts of Portland or the outskirts of Oregon. And we have to decolonize and simultaneously build the future. And so I think that really, a lot of that process is trying to live in that way in real time, as everybody has kind of mentioned, everybody making conscious choices to use their conscience. And I really want to Yeah, it's really
Great.
amazing panel.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much, Chris. And so just really rapid fire, where do we find everyone online? Andrea? Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Okay.
AndreaHairston.com.
All right, Chris?
Silver Spook Games, just Google it.
All right. C?
clpolk.com.
Vita? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
VitaCruz.org.
All right, Vikram?
At Vikram Paralkar on Twitter.
Thank you. And I'm Valerie Valdez, valerievaldez.com. Thank you all so much for coming. Hope you enjoyed the panel. Thank you all.
Thank you all for attending. Feel free to continue the conversation on our Discord server.
Thank you so much.
Oh, could someone link me to the Discord? Because I couldn't.